Okay, well, good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I think it's a happy Thursday. With all that marketers have going on these days, it seems more and more like Thursday is the new hump day for us. Welcome to this, what I think is a pretty timely discussion about building a business case for marketing data management. I'm Bob Riazzi, the CEO of ReachForce, and I'm joined with Mr. John Donlin. He's the Research Director of Marketing Operations Strategies at SiriusDecisions. I'm very excited to hear from John, and we've asked him to share his research and perspectives about marketing data management. And I really, really look forward to hearing from him today. If many of you may have been to the recent SiriusDecisions Marketing Technology Exchange, it was out in Q4 of 2015, and from all accounts, it seems like John walked out of that show as the new rock star for all of us to follow. So I'm pretty excited about that. Our discussion will cover three key topics. The first is the state of marketing data management, and inside of that, we'll talk about why has it become so important. Second is the data management implementation process and what approach should we consider. This is where John will share some of the new SiriusDecisions methodologies around the implementation process, and I think it's somewhat hot off the press. Thanks, John. And then third, we'll talk about the key benefits and then building of that business case. If you do have questions throughout the discussion here today, please enter them in the chat box, and John and I will plan to respond at the end of our call to those. And so, John, it's your honors. Take it away, man.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for that great intro, and thanks everybody for joining today. I'm equally excited to share our perspective, and then also to hear Bob's perspective on things as well. I think it's going to be a great topic. What I wanted to do is start off and just provide a little bit of context around data management and do a little bit of a look back in terms of where we were just 15, 16 years ago even, and then compare that to where we are today. So, if we look at where we were with data management around the year 2000, it was a much different landscape. IT owned and managed most of the infrastructure. The systems that we had in place tended to be either homegrown, or if they were software packages, they were on-prem. IT also generally owned most of the purchasing process. And so the data that mattered to the different functions were either in silos or they existed in huge enterprise-wide software packages like ERP systems. And today, the landscape is much different. I think, first of all the activities that the different functions perform are much more interconnected than they've ever been. Things like product launches, lead management, content creation, all these things are really intertwined. The other big thing that we've seen is there's been a huge power shift. The individual functions now have the flexibility to buy essentially whatever technology they want to suit their needs. And they almost have to do it because they're feeling top-down pressure from their leadership team to show results for their area. So all this decentralization it's creating exponential complexity because with every new tech package that gets purchased is the data that gets stored in it, and you've got to think about how are we going to deal with that data, plus how are we going to connect it to the rest of the organization. And with IT not running everything centrally anymore, it gets that much more complex. So, one of the things that we work with our clients on is we help them try to understand what does that tech stack look like. And this is what we affectionately call the technology wheel. And the crazy thing to me about this is these are not specific pieces of technology that you might buy, but they're actually technology categories. And you can see how many there are. I mean, you look at things in reputation and demand. On the back office, there's a lot going on in operations and certainly in sales. The proliferation of technology is just amazing these days. And of course, with that comes all this extra data. And what we've seen is organizations are really struggling still, 15, 16 years later, moving away from that IT runs everything to, hey, we've all got our own technology and that underlying data. How do we keep it connected? There's a lot of complexity there that organizations are still wrestling with.
Yeah, and John, that brings up some great points of what we've seen over the last many months from SiriusDecisions and other leaders in the market like Scott Brinker and others that are bringing forward a pretty fresh view of the proliferation of marketing technologies and the infographics, over 43 different categories, over 2,000 different technology vendors that are playing in this space. And us as marketers are evaluating at all times what's the next technology that's going to really help us do better demand gen and make better decisions. And what the ReachForce perspective is on all this is that the prospect and customer data is really the most essential consideration when looking at all the technologies and primarily setting up your whole marketing strategy. The foundational is prospect and customer data, and really should be at the center of any marketing strategy. And all of the marketing technologies that we have implemented or plan to implement in the future focus either on increasing revenue contribution or integrating and aligning sales and marketing to a better way. But in terms of doing better with prospect and customer data, we see that we're able to do better targeting, better scoring, lead routing, better engagement through better messaging, campaign path and decisions are clearer and used with better data, and even we're able to make better predictions because the underlying data is supportive of those decisions. And as we implement marketing technologies, they rely on solving the garbage in, garbage out issue of poor, incomplete, and unconnected data. And so, with prospect and customer data at the center of a marketing strategy, our perspective is that the marketing data management strategy is critical to supporting the center of that strategy, and so would very much support that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a great perspective, Bob. And when we look at, I talked before about the proliferation of all this technology and the data that comes with it. And when you look at that, I think there are a number of issues that present themselves with it. So you can say, okay, well, there's more data. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, it is, and it is in some scary ways. I mean, first of all, there are the issues that we know about, the ones that we can detect. And this kind of gets back at what you were saying. There's, I work with a number of clients, and when we start working with them, sometimes they can't even tell the difference between their prospects and their customers, which sounds like a really simple delineation. It can be a lot more complex than that, but these are the kinds of things that we, the known problems we have. We're not able to segment the data the way we want to, or our sales reps are getting ready to pick up the phone for the first time and talk to somebody on the other end, and they want to better understand what that lead has been doing, what their digital body language has been, or what kind of interactions they've had with the company. Sounds pretty straightforward, but we don't have access to that data, and it's a little bit it's a little bit confusing. But these are the sorts of things that we're wrestling with every day that we have visibility to. Those are the detectable kinds of problems. Then there are the issues that are hidden. So these are the ones that are off our radar that we don't know about, gaps that we might have in reporting, for example. So somebody goes in to pull a report, see how performance has been by region, and you get the results back, but you may not realize that 30% of those records don't have a value for region. They show up as unknown, and so they're suppressed from that report, and now you're drawing conclusions that are kind of running the business off in the wrong direction. So, if you've got a centralized reporting team, they're going to be able to catch things like that, but in a self-service model that a lot of us live in, and anybody can go in and pull a report, you're not going to catch things like this. So there are also things that are hidden from our view. And then there's a third category. These are things that are, we're just not even doing because we know we don't have the good data for it. Would I love to be able to personalize the content on my website based on who that person is that's visiting, or the company they're coming from, or even just the sector? Yeah, I'd love to, but I don't have the data to be able to do that. Or would I want to do in-depth touch analysis to try and triangulate around the persona that's consuming, certain pieces of content at certain points in the buyer's journey? Yeah, that would be great, but I may not have the data to be able to do that. So I'm not even thinking about those things. And so when you take a step back and you look at this, two of the three areas where we potentially have issues with data are completely off our radar. And that's, this is a huge opportunity cost for organizations. I think A lot of organizations are wrestling with this. I guarantee, if you're on the line and listening to this, your competition is wrestling with this. And if you can solve some of these things, it's going to give you a huge advantage in the marketplace. So one of the things that we work with our clients on is, there's a lot to think about when you think about your data strategy and how to put it in place. And it can seem really overwhelming. It's really hard to understand where to start, what all the different parts and pieces are. And so, as Bob said, this is kind of hot off the presses. In the last few months, we've released the SiriusDecisions data strategy implementation process, and it's a step-by-step guide of walking you through the different things that you'll need to do when you want to think holistically about your data strategy. And we're not going to go through all 7 of these steps today, but I did want to highlight 3 of them that are particularly important when driving your data strategy. And that's around identifying the key processes that are heavily reliant on data. And then also downstream, how do you keep that data fresh? How do you curate that data? And then how can we measure results? The center of this webinar is how can you build a business case for investment in data? And you can have all kinds of activity around what you're doing around sprucing up the quality of your data and making it more connected. But if you can't show those results, you're not going to get more investment in the data. So it's those 3 areas that I really want to dig into and talk about today. So if we look at the first one, if we look at identifying the key processes, this is really important because the first thing that you might do is you're going to set up your governance construct. So you're going to figure out who should be on the governance council, how you're going to view your data, if you're going to view it system by system or function by function, maybe by the type of data. Kind of get that squared away first. But then, for a lot of organizations, they can't manage all the data in their organization. And a lot of the, marketing and sales, they don't necessarily have the capabilities to, to spearhead the MDM initiative for the whole company. So you want to winnow down the scope of what you're dealing with. And the best way to do that is to look at the specific processes that are most impacted by data, that are the most heavily reliant on data. And so, it's all well and good to say, okay, go turn back and figure out which ones those are. We've done a little bit of a shortcut for you and have laid out what we found to be the most important sales and marketing processes. And so if we go on to the next slide, we have 5 of those laid out that we can share with you. Again, I won't go through all of these for the sake of time, but just calling out a couple of them here. It starts with market intelligence. So we want to be able to segment our data. We've got, especially in the case of contacts, we've got to be able to put them into the right buckets. A CFO in healthcare may have very different needs than a CFO in the financial services industry. If we can't put people in the right bucket, we're not going to be able to tailor our messaging to them. We're going to have either watered down messages or they're going to be too specific. And so the idea of getting the data right for market intelligence is really important. Bob, you touched on this with lead routing and lead scoring to some extent too. You can have the best lead scoring algorithm in the world, but if you've got bad data going into it, you're going to be sending leads to sales either too soon or not soon enough. That's a bad thing. And similarly, with routing, a lot of times organizations have routing rules that are based on geography or an account-based methodology or on different territories. And if you don't have the data in there, then a lot of times what we see is the leads will end up in the miscellaneous queue and not go to a specific rep, or they'll go to the wrong rep, and then it takes time to forward to the next one, and that's a terrible customer experience, especially in the case of a contact us form fill that comes in where time is money. So data is really important in those 2 areas. And then finally, in reporting and analytics. I mean, I gave an example beforehand, but certainly if you're drawing the wrong conclusions from your data because you've got missing data or you've got incorrect data in there, then that's really a problem. So you really want to turn back and say, okay, what processes are most reliant on data, and then try and understand what the state of the data is for those processes. And following in the process, you come up with a little bit of a gap analysis, and then you say, okay, well, here's the data that's important, here's the current state of the data, what do we have to do to fill that gap? One of the things you want to do is you want to go out and get the missing data. So that's one of the steps in the process. But the next step is where I want to focus, and that's on curating the data that you do have. And this is where we see a lot of organizations fall down. I think a lot of organizations, and I've been there as a practitioner myself, you're on the hamster wheel of just buying more and more data, especially in the case of contacts and account info, and you're not taking care of the data that you have. So what we found is there are three approaches to curating your data, and they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, we find a lot of our clients are using a combination of these approaches. The first one, and this is the best approach, ideally, is to clean the data as it's coming into your systems. So out at the perimeter, you've got things in place like controls on forms. You've got policies in place so that when somebody comes back from a trade show, they know that they have to have these 10 fields filled out. There's validation in place to make sure they're standardized to the set of pick list values, that sort of thing. And as the data is coming in, it's cleansed, it's standardized, and it's appended. And that's a great first line of defense. All the tools that are out there, though, the processes aren't necessarily foolproof, and so we see a lot of organizations will have a little bit of a safety net on the back end. And this is where you can plug into a data vendor so that as soon as the records hit in your marketing automation platform or your Salesforce administration system, wherever the data is coming in, you can do a call right out to those systems, via a native integration or API, and do your cleanse and append activities right there. So for all intents and purposes, before it hits a pair of human eyes, the data is all squared away. We also see some organizations putting bodies in place to do kind of manual triage and eyeballing the data and make sure it looks right. So this is, again, this is a real-time data fix, data cleanse and append, but it's done on the back end, and it's a great backstop for when those front-end processes fall down a little bit. And then the third approach is to do that same sort of cleanse, but just do it on a less frequent basis. Now you're doing it in batch. So maybe you're sending part or all of your database off on a monthly or maybe a quarterly basis to get cleansed. You may be tying into some other existing internal systems. Maybe your billing system, really, you rely on that as having the most up-to-date address. So you might tie into that for syncing. And this is a little bit of a lower cost approach because it's less frequent. And obviously, if you're using internal systems, that's a lower cost as well. So combination of options there for keeping the data clean really using one or two of these methods is probably best, since no one approach is perfectly fail-proof. And then the last aspect of the model that I wanted to go over is around measuring results. So we find that a lot of organizations get hung up on just measuring the health of the database. And this is important, but it's not the only piece of measurement around data, and especially if you're looking to build the business case. So we have at Sirius, if you've worked with us before, we have a metric spectrum, which is essentially a set of categories into which you can put your metrics to start to tell a cause and effect story. And the first bucket that we have is the readiness bucket. And so this is where you can talk about the health of the database. Do we have enough of the right kinds of names in there? Both from a row and a field perspective, do we have all the data elements that we need? You can look at the growth of those records or the completion percentage, over time. These are all readiness metrics that put us in position to be able to execute on our more forward-facing marketing activities. And so the next area of metrics that we want to focus on are the activity metrics. And now we've got this great data, and now we've got our marketing activities that we're gonna perform. We want to see if we're getting any kind of lift in those activities. So are we having better deliverability rates? Are we seeing things like fewer leads being disqualified because they have under the category of bad contact data, that sort of thing. So is this better data helping in the different things that we're doing? But then that's not the end game either. I mean, all that activity is great, but it's supposed to lead to some sort of output. So this is the last class of metrics you'd want to think about using. And this is where you're looking at overall waterfall conversion rate. So are we seeing an improvement there? Are we seeing a lift in our sender score? Let's survey the people that are using the data and say, is this data easier to work with? Are we does it feel better? Are you doing less manual checking? Do you trust the data a little bit more? This is the sort of output kind of thing that we'd be looking for. So three areas that you want to think about when you're measuring data and starting to build the business case for how well better data is helping.
Thanks, John. We have a very, very similar perspective. There are multiple entry points for implementing a marketing data management strategy, and the the first one we look at is the inbound lead enrichment on registration forms that you talked about. And what happens here is we're able to ensure that the data is entered into the marketing automation platform at the point of lead conversion, which is the best point. We often talk about it, really stopping the sinning at the very front end. You bring those rich leads in, and you're able to, in real time, to do lead scoring, routing, entering into the messaging, nurture, so forth with the right data. The next entry point is the back-end database, where you do continuous maintenance and enrichment of that data. And what you do here is ensure that the marketing data is always campaign ready and positioned to support the tough marketing decisions across the business. Or then a combo where you're getting the front end and the back end done at the same time. And the key really is to get started. Focus on removing what is the biggest rock in the shoe at the time. And if inbound is the thing that you're betting in 2016, and it's time to get that thing going, the best way to do that is to join that initiative with the inbound lead data, for example. No matter what, though, what you have is wherever you start, you will lay the groundwork for expansion, because better data is a gift that will continue to give. Better data will drive higher performance, and as you continue to build performance, then you have the proof and the momentum to continue to expand. Some of the benefits, here we have on the left. Overall, what we're saying is by implementing a marketing data management strategy, better, more complete prospect and customer data will fuel demand generation and drive key marketing decisions to improve the business. The results are core to the business. Revenue contribution, marketing sales alignment lead the way. To illustrate this point, I've included a few of the impact numbers on the demand waterfall out of respect for John and his colleagues at SiriusDecisions. What you see is a pretty important areas to impact at the top, middle, and bottom of the funnel. And with clean and more complete prospect and customer data, you're able to have the profiles in the system so that data management hits all three areas and flows it through the funnel. A few examples of that would you support those results would be Marketo, and it has year in and year out using their data management with ReachForce has been able to increase their lead conversions by 34%. Hortonworks improves their campaign conversions by over 47%. And a key little supporting metric of that, they continue to see a 43% increase in their lead routing accuracy, which is really helping the combo of the marketing and sales teams work together. And then finally, the third example is Intact has fundamentally transformed their marketing database and created a 20% lift in their marketable ad sets through handling the better, clean, complete, unified data, and that's really fueling their demand generation. And so those are great examples to support, John, the power of implementing this.
Yeah, those really are nice examples, Bob. And I like I like how you called out the fact that data impacts the efficiency all throughout the waterfall. I think there's a tendency to think about how data can help at the top, with segmentation and getting your contact data squared away. But there's so much information that's important all the way through the waterfall and through the buyer's journey. And data has impact all along the way. So that's great. We also did a little bit of primary research around what are the compelling arguments for making the case for investing in data. So when it's a marketing ops person or somebody in demand creation, and they're saying, hey, we think we need to do better with our data. I need money. how can I get this money? How can I persuade you that this is useful for the business? And so what I wanted to share was some of the results that we had from that study and what some of the more compelling arguments were. So we kind of listing the top 5 here, and at the coming in at number 5, 26% of the respondents said that, well, we want to be able to create a unified view of our contact data. This is what's important to us. We are working in silos, and we know some aspects of our customers and prospects, but we don't have kind of a holistic look at everything they've been doing. And so if we were able to invest in data, then we could get that view. And so that ranked as one of the top reasons that were compelling. Next up on the list was being able to get easier access to the data. So sometimes it's all well and good to have this super clean, super connected data, but if you don't have an easy way of getting access to it, if you have to hunt around in 3 or 4 different systems, or the user interface isn't that great to be able to interpret the data, that's a problem. And so this again was one of the more compelling arguments. And then above that was reducing the cost. So certainly you want to say, okay, well, we're going to be investing this money in the data. What's it going to get me? And so you can look at it a couple of different ways. You can say, well, there's going to be lift, hopefully, in what we're doing from a demand creation perspective, but there might also be lower costs around maintenance and acquisition of the data. We're going to spend less time on that hamster wheel. We're going to see gains in productivity around our segmentation activities. We're not going to have as much churn trying to figure out, get down to that list that we want to do an outbound campaign for. So the financial side of it was pretty important. And then the top 2 here were, they kind of sat head and shoulders above the other 3, but still, in the top 5 here, that impact on demand creation. So there's your top line argument, and not just helping with the bottom line of the cost savings. 77% of respondents said that was important, and then 81% said the quality and the reach of the database. So interestingly, I think a lot of when you speak to people around the organization, data isn't always the sexiest topic. If you can talk about the byproduct, the business impact, and the results that it's having, I think that's a little bit more of a compelling case. But actually what we saw in the survey was that the senior leadership team is swayed by knowing that, we're working those readiness metrics, and we're in a position to be able to use that data and execute on our activities. And so, some interesting results here. I think, hopefully this is helpful for you too when you go back and you have to make the case for investing in data. These are some of the, reasons that might resonate with your leadership team. And then finally, what I wanted to share with you too is what we've gleaned, partly from research, partly just from experience of working with our clients all the time. What are some of the common traits for a really good data strategy? Again, it can be a little bit overwhelming when you think about everything you have to do with your data. But if you have these traits, I think you'll have a lot of success. You look to emulate some of these things. So the first thing is, don't try and boil the ocean. Start small and expand from there. If you're going to put a data strategy, a data governance structure in place, do it in a pocket of the business. Do it for one function, do it for one business unit, that sort of thing. Work the kinks out, but then expand quickly from there. I've seen, so many data governance councils that are, they just try and solve all things data for the whole organization, and it sounds like a great idea. It sounds holistic, and then they just kind of end up collapsing under their own weight 18 months later. And so, start small and expand from there. That's one of the best practices. The other thing is to, and this, I kind of laugh about this because it tends to go against the nature of maybe the introverted marketing ops persona. One of, I count myself among those folks, is to get out there and promote the great, the great lift that you're getting from the data, either the cost savings or the lift in demand gen. And don't talk as much about, great, we've got 20% more names in the database than we did 6 months ago. That doesn't lead with the business impact. That's really what you want to do, is talk about the business results, not so much the back office infrastructure fixes that you've been making. But the point there is get out and talk about the good work that you've been doing. The third trait is really about working with a sense of urgency. So, a lot of times organizations will put a lot of effort into a big data cleanup, and then it'll turn into kind of this run rate work that they sort of forget about or fades into the background. And really what we've seen is the highest performing organizations around implementing a really great data strategy are always on it. New things come up all the time. Some business unit decides to add a telequalification team where it didn't exist before. Well, that's a whole new process, and with that comes some new data, and so you've got to understand what the reporting implications are for that and that sort of thing. So you need to work with a sense of urgency, and even when all the work that you've done is kind of settled into kind of a long-term run rate kind of work stream. And then finally, you need to have some skin in the game for the people that are working with the data. So, certainly people who might have the title of data steward, they're going to be gold on the work that they're doing around data. But for other people that are serving on the data council, for example, and are working with the other functions and the interlock involved there, find out what when you have the goals for that data council, translate those down into the individual's goals and objectives for the year. Put some skin in the game so that they're committed to going to those council meetings and not just blowing them off or having somebody go in their place. This has got to be, the data is so powerful for the organization. It's got to be something that we're paying attention to. And sometimes you can, you can force that a little bit by putting it in people's performance appraisals.
Well, thanks, John. You are the real deal. Let me see if I could quickly recap before we go to questions. So marketing data management is clearly building in importance. As marketing technologies proliferate and data silos continue to be built and broaden, we have a stronger need to build the quality of our prospect and customer data across our enterprises. The key to using prospect and customer data to do better one-to-one engagement is accelerating. It's a continuous process. It's not just a project or a single event. Next is data management leads to better understanding of your prospects and customers, and it really does drive increased marketing automation, production, demand generation, revenue generation, performance. Business cases are often built across the marketing and sales processes. There's a strong link to the business results and are usually led by, as John described, an improvement in the quality of reach of the database, and as well as the impact on demand gen, both in around the 80% of the research said that those were the top two areas. And so finally, adopt an agile mindset and get started. Like planting a tree, the best time to start was yesterday, the next best time is today. So with that, let's go to a Q&A, and I'm looking at the chat box now. And true to form, John, of course, you get the bulk. All right, so here, let me go ahead and ask you one, John. It says, can I tie improvements in data directly to revenue?
Yes. This is a good question, and we get this a lot, actually. So it's a little bit tricky here. I think it's tempting to say, let's look at all the work we did to improve our data, and let's tie that directly to the lift we're seeing in revenue or even pipeline. And you have to be really careful there because there are many factors that contribute to a lift in revenue. You can't say, hey, we got more names in the database, and so now we had $1 million lift for this quarter. It doesn't work that way. There are a lot of factors that go into it. So, certainly it's one part of the story. I think from a credibility standpoint, you have to be careful not to make that connection directly. Instead, what's more productive, we found, is to make that cause and effect story, like we talked about when we were going through the measure results section. So let's talk about our metrics in terms of readiness, how much better the database is, and then how it's impacting the activities that are immediately downstream from that, and then the output that those activities are creating. The last category of metrics in our metric spectrum is impact, and that's where some of your KPIs are, like share of voice, share of wallet, revenue, that sort of thing. And so certainly you want to tell that story and connect the dots, but don't say everything we did in, because of what we did in data was solely responsible for this lift in revenue. It's a dangerous connection to make. Certainly you want to have that be part of the story, though.
And I think as you see clear indications of lift in key conversion metrics like MQL to SQL, or the overall number of MQLs is huge and has a direct impact on revenue and proof of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And John, you of
course,
you're right. You get one more question here.
Okay.
What's the biggest gotcha when it comes to implementing a data strategy?
Oh, yeah. Well, in my experience and what I've seen from our clients, and also, again, based on my experience as a practitioner, I think it's the rush to immediately try and just clean the data. There's this knee-jerk reaction, hey, our data stinks, we got to go clean the data. That is absolutely an important part of it. You don't want to leave your data dirty, but you need to be a little bit more thoughtful about which data you're going to approach first. Most organizations don't have all the resources in the world, so working through that process that we talked about before, of trying to figure out which are your most important processes, and then talking to the people that are in those processes to understand what's important to them from a data perspective. I think we have a tendency, especially in marketing ops, to assume we know what good data looks like and assume we know what people need to do their job, what kinds of pieces of information they need. But go ask them, go talk to them. Do a sanity check, even if you feel like you've got a pretty good handle on it. You might be surprised, and you very well may find out there are pieces of data that you're keeping clean and they don't care about, and then there are a bunch of missing pieces of information that you don't have and they would love to have. So I think that talking to your internal customers piece and validating what's important to them is probably the missing piece. And then once you've got a good handle on what those data requirements are, essentially, then you've got your scope of what data is important, and then you can work on that continuous hygiene process that you talked about, Bob.
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, I think that's one of the core considerations as you implement data management. We have one. I'll try to kick this one off, John. It says you talked about. I think that's to me. You talked about prospect and customer data management, and prospect data resonates with me as we're focused on new business acquisition. However, are you seeing a large uptick in the priority of focusing on customer data management? And I really do thank you for that question. Yes, new business acquisition has consistently been the focus of the marketers that we've been working with. We are seeing an interesting move toward customer marketing in at least two areas. The first is high-tech software companies that are increasingly needing to improve retention and renewals of their software, which is one of the more important parts of the business growth. So their responsibilities are growing, where they have a dual focus now on new customer acquisition and then the retention renewal side. And also we're seeing, and this is across industries, companies that have a suite of products, multiple product divisions, that they have the opportunity to cross-sell and upsell to the same account and often the same organization within the account. They are also implementing an additional customer marketing strategy. For both cases, customers need to not only make sure the data is accurate and as complete as possible, but there's a need now to be able to unify the data so you have a better view, a fuller view of that prospect and customer across the many different technologies, the many different data silos that data represents, and bringing it into a single decision. So the customer marketing side is we expect, and I think John, your research would tell it too, is expect that to continue to increase throughout 16 and 17. So anyway, that's,
Yeah,
go ahead.
absolutely, Bob. No, I was just going to echo what you said. Absolutely. I think customer marketing is becoming a bigger and bigger piece of what marketing is taking on, especially in the tech and SaaS world where retention is so important. And for people that are instituting an account-based marketing strategy as well, you've got to understand what those accounts look like you said, who's bought from you, what parts of the business have bought from you, where there's opportunity for cross-sell, upsell. So it's hugely important.
Great. Well, John, this was fun. Thank you. And thank you all for participating with us today. It's been a pleasure, and great marketing, great selling out there, and I look forward to the next time we're together. Have a great day.